The tutorial will be taught jointly by myself and Maria Wimmer from University of Koblenz-Landau. The material was prepared, my part of the material was prepared in collaboration with Adegboyega Ojo and Elsa Esteves from UNU in Macau. This tutorial is a response of a pressure for governments to show that ICT investment is actually producing concrete public value, that ICT and electronic government is contributing to, in a concrete way, to development objectives, and we'd like to, and to policy goals by government, and we would like to choose sustainable development as a case of a policy and see how electronic government can contribute. So the purpose of the tutorial is to propose and demonstrate the concept of electronic governance for sustainable development. Arguably, this concept is not well understood, is not standard, and is just emerging. So what do we understand by electronic government in the deployed in the pursuit of public goals and in the pursuit of sustainable development in particular? We will explore how ICEGOV can advance the various dimensions of sustainable development, social, environmental, economic, and transitional sustainability. And that's the part where Maria will be teaching, will take over. We will explain how open government and policy development can help realize ICEGOV for SD concept. So from now on, I will talk about electronic governance as ICEGOV and electronic governance for sustainable development as ICEGOV for SD. Okay? So in line with this aim, the tutorial is structured into 4 parts: electronic governance for development, and electronic governance for sustainable development, before moving to realizing the ICEGOV concept with open government and policy modeling and development framework. So that's the plan for the next 2 hours. Maria will expand the agenda for the last topic in her presentation. So let me start with a very broad context for electronic government in general. And the context is the pressure that governments around the world are under from globalization, from fiscal demands, from evolving societies, from raising citizen expectations. Governments are expected to be responsive to social change, to address public concerns, to deliver effective government programs, to manage public funds efficiently, to implement the principles of good governance, etc., etc. In short, governments are expected to produce public value. At the same time, we see a number of opportunities being created by the progress in technologies, information technologies and internet. So whether we talk about Web 2.0 and its various manifestations like RSS, blogs, wikis, social networking, mashups, virtual worlds, or when we talk about semantic web or cloud computing or software service, global digital identity, ubiquitous computing. By the way, it's true, we tested yesterday that here in Tallinn, broadband is everywhere. Well, at least we couldn't refute the claim that we have a ubiquitous broadband here. Ambient service, pervasive broadband. So this progress creates opportunities for government, in particular, to address the pressures. So in response to the pressures and utilizing the technological progress, governments are innovating. They are innovating in terms of the development of infocom infrastructures, in terms of reuse of public information, citizen-centric practice, one service space. This is from Estonia. Public, private, and voluntary sector services come together into one space, etc. And this innovation, in turn, results in fundamentally new ways, new paradigms of public administration and governance, like collaborative government, participatory government, mobile government, agile government, the local e-government, so the shift from national down to provincial and local level e-government to deliver concrete benefits to people, and the two manifestations of eGov in the development and in the sustainable development concept. Okay, so pressure on governments, technological progress, innovations, and how it helps to utilize technology in response to the pressures, and fundamentally new ways for public administrations to operate and to relate with various stakeholders enabled by technology. So this creates a kind of broad context for understanding what is electronic governance. There is no single definition. Various definitions are still contested. Here I put 4 definitions. Some define eGov as basically government online. Others will talk about all kinds of ICT applications, whether front or back office by government. And other definitions will talk about transformation. Transformation of the internal working of government, or transformation of the interactions or relationships between government and citizens, government and businesses, government and government. Okay, so for the purpose of this tutorial, we will adopt the last, the transformational definition that looks broadly not only at the internal working of government, but also at the interaction with the public. Now you can also, and these definitions can be nicely actually placed at the intersection of the administrative system, political system, and civil society, and how they actually intersect. So depending on the assumed definition, the different aspects of these 3 domains will be taken into account. And also, the eGov is not a discipline, and it probably will never be a discipline. It's a problem domain, and to which many disciplines can contribute. So you see a number of possible contributions from informatics, from political science, public administration science, economics, management, sociology, and depending on the definition chosen, the disciplinary contributions can happen in various ways. So this also shows a possible contribution by different disciplines. Now, if we kind of deconstruct this, our working definitions of electronic governance into something more systematic, like eGov determines how government applies technology to transform itself and its interactions with customers in order to create impact on the society. Then from this, we can see that there are clear 5 dimensions. So we can deconstruct these definitions and identify 5 dimensions of government, technology, interaction, customers, and society, and within each dimension, a number of variables, which by themselves can be refined into concrete indicators to actually measure progress in these areas. So government, mission, role, values, technology, like equipment, infrastructure, data, interaction, channels, interoperability, governance, customers, information needs, producer, consumer roles, accessibility, trust, society, demography, digital inclusion, social tension, participation, and others. So it's possible to kind of construct the domain along certain dimensions, just looking at the definition and then trying, and this is very important for us, because in this tutorial, we're looking at 2 domains, eGov on the one hand and SD on the other hand. So the question is whether there is a systematic way to actually look at both domains and try to define a mapping, to define a relationship. Beyond just showing examples of what is possible with eGov4D, but at systematically looking at the nature of these 2 domains and trying to deconstruct the definition to come up with dimensions, variables, etc. So this is what the tutorial effectively will present for you. So at the same time, despite a rather short life, maybe we can talk about 15 years for electronic government, short history, we have seen also a change in focus. So a very obvious kind of shift has been from the technical to organizational to societal focus. And let me just walk through these 3 areas briefly, focal areas briefly. So at the beginning of electronic governance, and in many places until today, the focus is technical and technological. The goals are to establish government websites, to publish government information online, to provide online access to public services, to automate and optimize administrative processes. The corresponding challenges are technical, providing connectivity, assuring interoperability between systems, connecting legacy systems to other systems and the internet and others. But we also understand today that this technological perspective has severe limitations. So technology issues are not isolated. The context, organizational and even broader societal context, is very important for understanding how technology should be deployed. Over-reliance on technology is a typical source of failure. Developing more mature services, transactional services, connecting agencies together draws us immediately into organizational issues. And technological development alone really does not produce public value, does not directly result in public value. So the focus has shifted to organizational and transformational issues, the objectives being to transform the internal working of agencies using technology, to establish collaboration between agencies and across the whole of government arrangements, and to offer seamless transactional services through multiple delivery channels, traditional and electronic. The challenges refer to typical traditional ways of working for government, so command and control operations, narrow specializations, inward-looking cultures, resistance to change, and lack of collaboration. So typically this is a set of challenges to pursue the organizational and transformation through technology. And again, this focus has its limitations because really, if we are moving to higher service maturity through more organizational change, this may not lead to more usage of services. You know, the usage is essential, as we've heard from the minister in the opening. Insufficient public consultation is a source of failure, so just internal transformation does not suffice. The purpose of internal transformation really has to be defined outside government. So the purpose is really external performance, measured, well, typically from outside government rather than just purely from inside the government perspective. And again, organizational change alone does not create public value. So again, we are moving on to extend the focus into more developmental issues, going really outside the government boundaries and talk about the societal, economic, environmental issues. So goals include how to ensure that electronic public services are actually used by citizens, how to engage non-state actors in the pursuit of public policy and public goals. Arguably, there is not enough capacity within government to pursue many of the complex public goals. How can governance through networks, so this engagement of government with the non-state actors, support the pursuit of major policy objectives, and the bottom line, how to make sure that government investment into ICT produces public value. A number of challenges, foremost lack of trust. So this engagement of the stakeholders, of citizens, businesses in the governance networks will face the deficit of trust on both sides. Citizens do not trusting the government, and governments do not trusting their citizens. Determining the impact, the actual impact of technology on development is still an unresolved issue. We really don't know how to measure, for instance, the MDG8, the Global Partnership for Development. We still don't know how to actually apply reliable measures to what progress we're making in investing into technology. There is, of course, an issue of managing conflicts and balancing contradictory requirements given the space of stakeholders, and then measuring public value in complex non-financial terms is difficult. So this has been kind of the context for electronic governance and what are the dimensions, definitions, and how the focus has changed over time. I just will show two brief examples, looking again at this picture of technology, pressures on government innovation and paradigms. This is an example from the EU declaration of ministers, ICT ministers, EU ICT ministers from Malmö from 2010. Mobile government is one of the strategies strongly pursued in this declaration. Of course, this requires innovations. Still in the declaration, there is a mention of reuse of public information, seamless mobile services, and in turn, this requires a certain set of technology development, Web 2.0, pervasive broadband, global digital identity. Okay, now I just like to take maybe 3 minutes to kind of pose a question to the audience. I hope you will be interested to contribute to possible answers. How is technology applied in your organization to address the external pressures? And what innovations emerge as a result? How is technology applied in your organization to address external pressures on it, and what kind of innovations you have seen emerging in response to such pressures? I wonder if there is if somebody would have any comment, any possible short answer, a case, please.
I can break the ice.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I come from Toscana. My name is Francesco, by the way. My region has steadily applied technologies for public participation in decision making, and the innovations emerged are not only related to the political sphere, so people who trust their governments more, people who are happier to participate, but there are signals of behavioral change, because when the people who participate, for example, in a public debate concerning how to best differentiate waste, when they go home, they are likely to improve their own behavior, spread the news, spread the positive news about the feelings they have during the debate, and so on and so forth. These may have limited impact on virtuous behavior.
On political behavior online, yes? Not only political.
Personal lifestyles may be changing due to this involvement, which has to be steady, not one-off, but steady involvement in the political process with concrete examples and concrete goals in this involvement.
And what is the external pressure to what external pressure you respond with?
Basically, two kinds of pressure. One is that there are some public services who cannot be fully delivered if not with the complete involvement and engagement of beneficiaries themselves. Like, for example, what I make, something we cannot do on government. Another pressure may be to have a more shared vision of the future in several respects, like, for example, making hugely impacting investments that bring economic value to the community, but may jeopardize the environment. You know about the environment. In those cases, more consensus is not only a political matter, it's also a way to make things progress.
Right.
The participation infrastructure is something I can contribute to create.
To give people a voice in decision-making processes that directly affects their lives. Thank you very much. Very short, please. Yes?
I was a consultant project for IT strategy development for Ministry of Economy, which is not considered in Georgia government champion. So the external pressure was from the champions like Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Justice to apply just the document exchange system.
Inside government.
Inside the government, inside the Ministry of Economy. So the views migrated from just applying the software, and after working with us as consultants, finally they understood that the internal organizational change was needed. So this was the change. They now started to understand that this is just not software, as you mentioned, it's more about internal change.
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. There will be two more points in this tutorial where I will request your contributions. Thank you very much for this. Let me move on. After introducing the concept of electronic governance, I just like now to consider what the concept means for development. In what sense we can realize, we can help the pursuit of development goals using electronic governance. So ICEGOV2011. So by development, I mean, there are various definitions and schools of thought. Here we mean the economic, social, political development in the countries of what we call global south. So Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, Pacific. Development is defined across various dimensions. The economic dimension, so the creation of wealth and improved conditions of material life. Social dimension, so well-being in health, education, housing, and employment. Political dimension, human rights, political freedoms. Cultural dimension, various beliefs, self-identity of the people, and environmental dimension, commitment to ecologically sound, sustainable development. Again, various goals, frameworks of objectives have been defined on the national level and international level to measure the progress toward development. And of course, the best known is the framework of Millennium Development Goals by United Nations. We are approaching the review point in 2015, where we are supposed to actually meet those goals and the targets. But overall, we can say that the results of development have been disappointing, if not an utter failure, except for a small number of countries, mainly in East Asia. Republic of Korea, for instance, is an example. And the three key reasons for development failure has been inappropriate policy choices, poorly performing public sector, and changing trends in development administration. So, for instance, whether government should do this, all of these, or it should rely on the private sector to do it, or just somewhere in between, just for example. So the governance failure, the failure of the state organizations, of the public sector, has been a strong reason for the development challenges. Yes. So the role of government for development is formulating and implementing jointly with the private sector and civil society the development policies to generate economic growth, provide education, maintain security, expand jobs, etc. The failures of governance are typically attributed to excessive use of regulations and formal rules, poor communication between agencies, centralization of decision-making, a large distance between public servants and citizens, orientation on maintenance rather than outcomes, inefficiency, unresponsiveness, administrative corruption, and gender bias. And in response to these failures, many governments have implemented public sector reform to eliminate red tape, decentralize and devolve the authority, improve responsiveness to citizens, engage the public in decision-making and policy-making, developing human capacity in government, introducing clear performance and measures and accountability frameworks, delivering public services by non-public entities, and utilizing ICT in all aspects of the reform. So this is particular where we are interested in, and ICT has been used not just to support the governance of the development process, but for the development objectives themselves. So here, ICT4D, we mean by this the application of ICT to socio-economic development. This can be the direct to benefit people, or indirect to assist governments and NGOs to improve socio-economic conditions. I mean, whatever is whether it's direct or indirect, we can find specific ways through which ICT can actually help achieve development. So just some examples, looking at the MDGs for poverty, increasing market access and competitiveness of the poor, for education, increasing access to quality education through distance learning, for gender, increasing economic and job opportunities for women, for health, connecting rural health providers, informal, with the formal health system, environment, monitoring and risk mitigation, partnership, good governance, pursuing the principles of good governance. Maria will talk about this in her presentation. So by electronic governance for development, we mean the ICEGOV, so the transformation of the working of public administrations and how they relate to citizens on development-related objectives. This includes enhancing the capacity of agencies for public service delivery through the process of ICT-enabled reform and decentralization, using ICT to support the delivery of accessible and affordable services that are most needed by the poor and small businesses, enabling through ICT increased participation of disadvantaged groups in policy decision-making, especially in the matters that concern their lives, etc., as well as support for the governance of the development process. So we are not restricting ICEGOV to only supporting the governance of development, but we seek ways to support the development objectives directly. The governance, on the other hand, is the management of the development process through a framework of rules and institutions to regulate the conduct of all actors involved, whether public or non-public. But we are not restricting ourselves only to supporting governance. So this is a kind of conceptualization, a picture of how we can view ICEGOV for D. You have the government hierarchy on the left, you have the various non-government, non-state actors, academia, private sector, civil society. On the right, they are connected into a governance network within government between different functions and levels of government and across the sectors. The government undergoes certain transformations, internal transformations, and the whole network works in the framework of certain objectives, certain development goals, like MDGs. So, and it works together to create impact, to create concrete benefits to citizens, to businesses, to agencies, to communities, to help them pursue whatever is important to them. I guess citizens want happiness and businesses want pursue money, agencies mission, communities relationships. I mean, whatever way we see the pursuit of individual objectives, as well as strengthening the overall socio-economic environment. It's a big picture of how we can view ICEGOV for D and what will be the role of governance network in such a pursuit. Here is a brief, short example from Cameroon. We just finished a project to develop the national electronic government strategy and program for electronic government. The strategy is located in the policy context to support the public sector reform and the national ICT policy, and directly the growth and employment strategy, which itself and all of them are contributing to the national development vision 2035. So the policy context, clearly any activity with this kind of relationship is ICEGOV for D, because the development needs come very explicitly from the policy context that we try to pursue. Some lessons learned from such a project, just from the field, I would say. Lower levels of government are always low priority. So national agencies prefer to invest at the central level for visibility, and this creates increasing divide within countries between the central and local level. Fragmented stewardship. ICEGOV development rests with IT agencies, but implement government collaboration as very important element in the sustainability of ICEGOV for D programs, engaging local academia in research, education, training, significantly improves program sustainability. And the lesson that bureaucracy is pervasive. So in our case, we have seen how authorizations are required for every action in such projects, so project managers really cannot decide on the basic activities, and progress is only assured with the direct engagement of the agency heads. Yeah? So this is a peculiar experience from an ICEGOV for D project. Okay. Discussion we covered, so I'd like to move on straight now to sustainable development. So I explained the concept of electronic governance and the same concept in a development context, and I'd like to now explain what we mean by ICEGOV for SD. So the famous Brundtland's report defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this definition puts forward two essential concepts of needs, which are essential needs of the world's poor, and limitations. So these are limitations imposed by the current state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet our needs, now and in the future. Now, this is a very broad definition, and usually it's not applied directly. It has to be interpreted. It has to be localized. So the process of doing this is usually to explore the dependencies between various SD principles in different decision-making situations. The principles include poverty alleviation, environmental policy integration, inter- and intra-generational equity, public participation in policy and decision-making, and technological and environmental limits to growth. So usually the SD definition is operationalized by looking at the local context and looking at the balance of the SD principles and what they mean for us in a given context. Now, like development, SD is a process, it's a transition that is not just internal to the government, it's a transition of the society as a whole, of the way we are relating to each other and to our environment. So as a process, the governance of this process is of primary importance. Okay, thank you very much. The fourth dimension, the transition, sustainability transition, talks about integration, about policy integration, and there are various approaches to seek this integration, whether, well, Maria will talk about policy development, but alignment is typically also a way that we seek over time how the different programs are kind of converge, yes, and how we can reach a balance between the level of, say, economic and social development, environmental issues, etc. Yes.
Toyed with the idea of convergence.
Okay.
In the year 2000.
Okay.
It's already 11 years. And politically, I'm frankly to
yes.
I'm very frank to speak here that we never converged.
Yes, please.
I have a little different experience in this regard. We are working in the model watershed project. So there we are successful in bringing all the government schemes together in form of a convergence, like social forestry department, irrigation department, and many other departments which are headed by the district magistrate. We brought all the people over there, and we did lot of things for the sustainable development of those people who are living in those villages where our watershed development project is going on.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me move on. I'd like to just step back a little bit to at least show you how we are mapping these two domains, ICEGOV and sustainable development. Yes, so if we take the goals of this is not the one. Okay, so the goals for environmental, economic, social sustainability and sustainability transition. I explained them already. And here is a kind of big picture conceptualization where we consider SD as a balance between social, environmental and economical concerns. There may be more. Culture is typically mentioned as the fourth dimension, and how we are applying ICEGOV, which by itself is positioned at the intersection of political, administrative system and civil society to result in ICEGOV for SD, which is how ICT supports the governance and also the fulfillment directly of sustainable development goals. So that's a kind of conceptualization of how we understand these domains of SD and ICEGOV to converge into ICEGOV for SD. But I will do a little bit more precise mapping on the next slides. Yes? So let's look at social sustainability. The concept has been set up for electronic governance for sustainable development, and what does it mean if we apply this to various sustainability goals? So the question is, how can ICEGOV initiatives explicitly address the social sustainability goal? Okay? So we're looking at ICEGOV dimensions: government, technology, interaction, customers, society, and we look at the SD goals, particularly at social sustainability. We elaborate these goals into objectives. This is just some of the objectives, like access for all, reducing poverty and inequality, reducing gender inequality, reducing infant and maternal mortality. And we're looking at how the various ICEGOV dimensions can actually make a positive contribution on these objectives. For instance, technology and access for all. ICEGOV technology initiatives should consider accessibility issues. So the issues of cost, ability to use, ability to benefit of all segments of the society in their technology choices. For instance, and Joanna will know a lot about this, the support for mobile channels for service delivery. Okay, Joanna has done a study of the headquarters, of the impact of possessing a mobile phones for the headquarters in Ghana. Okay, that's an example, a concrete initiative, concrete instance of how mobile technology can help. If we look at just one more dependency, maybe from the technology-enabled information and services to reducing poverty and inequality, which is B, we're looking at the measure where ICEGOV services enable citizens, and particularly the disadvantaged groups, to meet their critical livelihood needs, like access to jobs, like primary health services, like educational services, sanitation, etc. Okay? Now, this is actually what you see here are highlights from national e-government strategies for Singapore, for Korea, for Estonia, for European Union, and also highlights from the most recent e-government benchmark instruments like United Nations e-government survey and Waseda University survey. These are just highlights. But here I put in color those of the strategy highlights that refer to social sustainability, like electronic health records from Singapore, like improvements of services to cater for different needs from EU, like involvement of stakeholders in public policy process, like citizen-centric practice, traceability of the use of one's own data. This is what the president talked about in his keynote just last hour. Internet in rural areas, increase of social media applications for participation. So we see that in the practice and strategic development of e-government around the world, we do see how sustainability issues are being tackled directly. Here is just a concrete example of the sustainable social services in the UK, which is a kind of framework for action in Wales to focus on citizen-centered services, integrated services, reducing complexity, and safeguarding and promoting the well-being of citizens. It's a framework for action addressing directly social sustainability issues. The next goal, environmental sustainability. Here we're asking the question, how can ICEGOV initiatives explicitly address the environmental sustainability goal? And again, we are expanding the environmental sustainability goal into objectives like climate change, improved water management, reduced land degradation, and restoration of biodiversity. And we're looking at the opportunities that ICEGOV dimensions create for the fulfillment of those goals. For instance, how technology can help in climate change. So we look at the use of low or zero carbon emission ICT equipment for government operations, both front and back office. Or if we look at the improved water management through technology-enabled services, so C, providing information and services to citizens and businesses on better domestic water management practice and smart metering systems. Okay, so we have some concrete measures that ICEGOV can help in this totally non-technological areas and non-technological objectives. When we again look at the highlights from the national strategies, then several of them directly refer to the goal of environmental sustainability. For instance, EU highlights the reductions in carbon footprint, Estonia, paperless document management, Waseda, cloud computing, and data center virtualization. So cloud computing is a measure that we can apply to seek environmental sustainability, and smart grid and green technology. Here is a concrete example, an initiative from the Maldives, crowdsourcing the renewable energy strategy. The aim of this is to invite experts from around the world to provide technical advice on low carbon energy generation, storage, and financing. The objective being to make the country carbon neutral by 2020 and to address the lack of local technical expertise. So a number of themes and questions are being addressed, and the experts are invited to contribute to them. It's like crowdsourcing the national strategy development. Looking at the next goal, economic sustainability, we look at how ICEGOV initiatives can address the economic sustainability goals. This is here expanded into three objectives: transportation, logistics, economic growth, and improve energy consumption. And again, we are looking at the opportunities offered by different dimensions, ICEGOV dimensions, to the fulfillment of these objectives. For instance, in what sense technology infrastructure can help the improvements in energy consumption by the use of energy efficient technology equipment in government operations and incorporation of such equipment in the government procurement practice. Okay, that's two examples. Another one, transportation and logistics, how the technology-enabled services can help transportation and logistics objective, which is B, providing information and services to citizens to help reduce transport congestion. For instance, real-time service to check traffic situations in different parts of cities. Okay, so a way of trying to map for each of these concrete measures. Of course, there are many examples around the world to actually illustrate how they are operationalized. Looking at the national strategies, several of them refer to economic sustainability from Singapore, innovation centers and entrepreneurship, from Korea, public-private collaborative governance, from Estonia, one service space, putting together public, private, and voluntary sector services into one space. And from EU, inviting third parties in ICEGOV development. Here is a concrete initiative by the California state government to provide green occupational guidelines to 23 different occupations. So the guidelines, the terms of reference for certain positions, and how they can be useful in pursuing economic sustainability. And the last dimension, the last goal, is sustainability transition. Here we look at how ICEGOV initiatives can address the sustainability transition goal, including the goals of adoption of green accounting, access to underprivileged groups, adoption of environmentally friendly technologies and practices, and generation of energy from renewable sources. We have only one measure applied here on technology-enabled services, and this is to provide information and services that show key sustainability indicators and how they can interpret in our daily life or in the decision-making by businesses. So here you see a system of indicators for sustainability, like social, population density, growth rate, life expectancy, infant mortality, economic indicators, air travel, energy consumption, growth of economic activities, environmental indicators, biodiversity, animal population, depletion of fossil fuels, or transitional indicators like changes in food and nutrition styles, environmental and general education, percentage of energy generated from renewable sources. So providing electronic services and information that can help people and businesses decide which channels to use to reduce the impact on and to help sustainability transition. So here are some examples from the highlights from the national strategies that directly address the sustainability transition goal, like active response to adverse effects of informatization from Korea, like internet addiction, like access to indecent content by children, like identity theft, from UN, agility to respond to more demands from services as revenues. Government revenues drop, and therefore investment into ICT, and from WASEDA, disaster management and business continuity. So here is just a concrete example from UK, ICEGOV portal offering information services on environment and green living. So recycling and reducing waste, energy saving, greener home, greener travel, greener community and work, greener life events and celebrations, yes, across different categories. What difference can we make with the choices that we decide? We had this already, and I reached the end with less time for Maria. Apologies for this. So, so what I introduced so far is the concept of electronic government and what this concept means for development and for sustainable development. This is just one understanding, but it has been done by systematically looking at the two domains, looking at the dimensions of these domains and trying to relate them together. And of course, it's not symmetrical. We seek ICEGOV as a tool for sustainable development, not the other way around. Yes, so this mapping has been defined in a fairly systematic way and with the concrete instances of how this is pursued around the world. So now we will look at how the ICEGOV 4SD concept can be realized, particularly through open government and policy development, how we can involve stakeholders in the policy development process. And this part will be taught by Maria Wimmer. I'm not sure whether we will have time for questions, but in any case, we are open. Yes.
I think that there is time for some questions.
Yes, yes. Afterwards, also offline. Yes, please.
I will also put this here.
Yeah, yeah, just in
straight
case.
up.
Just in case, yes.
Would you mind switching the slides? No, I think I need a set of you. So are there questions already to Tomasz' presentation for sustainable development? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So, let's see how this works. Yeah, thank you very much to Tomasz for the very good introduction to set up the ground for ICEGOV for sustainable development. My presentation, as he already mentioned, will focus now particularly on a project where we have developed a concept for policy development using stakeholder-oriented scenario development as a means to engage stakeholders in the policy development process. Before I introduce you to this concept of this project, I actually want to come back with some reflections what Tomasz has said, and trying to sum up a common understanding of open government and policy development, policy making also. Now, when Tomasz presented these different aspects that form up electronic governance, we already recognize we have organizational aspects, the institutional dimension, we have technology dimension, we have the people dimension, we have of course the process dimension and the content that we want to deal with. And all this together create a very complex socio-economic, socio-technical environment. And my background is from computer science. So what we are trying there usually is to systematize and to simplify these aspects in order to make them manageable. Complexity science is one of the areas that has a huge contribution to give in this domain in order to understand the different impact factors, impacting aspects that relate to each other when we talk about this kind of sustainable development. When we talk about a policy, it's the same. It's not just a strategic document that is out there that somebody has set up and then everybody's following. It's a complex process to come to such common conclusions. And it's not only the policy document out there, it is also the question of, well, how can this materialize in the end? How can we really bring it out there? It's not that somebody at the top level of government decides a policy and then it's done. It's not done, actually. We see in many cases that policies fail or do not reach the objectives to that sophistication as we want. And very often the problem is that we didn't foresee the complexity, but also that we didn't foresee the engagement of the stakeholders, that we didn't ask the stakeholders whether they wanted, and we didn't see the value, public value, as Tomasz mentioned before. Now, we have to deal with all these factors in our 21st century environment and era. And this brings me to the point where we have to reflect a concept. He mentioned it before, Tomasz, already. Good governance. It's not a new concept. It's actually a concept that emerged in the 80s, like last century. The good governance principles. What do they mean? Basically, and this is an understanding taken from the European Commission's document, a communication document, good governance principles refer to the approaches and guidelines for good governance and public administration to promote the interaction and the formation of political will with regard to societal and technological change. This was especially set up also with the realm of information society development. And there are several good governance definitions, not only the one from the EC, which covers 5 principles, namely openness, participation, transparency, accountability, effectiveness, and coherence. Openness referring to involving people, stakeholders, in political decision-making, letting people understand, giving them access to information, giving them access to understand how decisions have been made. Participation, referring to going one step further from openness. People can participate in political decision-making or in public service delivery, engaging the people in shaping up society and governance. Accountability, that the political level and the government level can be held accountable for what they are doing, for the promises they give during election periods and the services that are being provided later on, and that these actions are being accountable. Effectiveness, that the money spent for providing these services and for establishing forward-looking policies is spent well, that it's effectively put in place, that there is public value out of investments and of service delivery. And coherence, that the goals that are set are really reached and the actions correspond to the policy objectives, and that there is a coherent way of interaction. There are, as I said, several public policy good governance principles set out, and another one is from an OECD study. You see this is already from 2003, basically. The one point that I want to add here is transparency, because in the EC, transparency is not directly mentioned, but it is encompassed in the objectives. However, it plays a very important role in order to ensure trust in government and trust in these people, as it was also in the slides of Tomasz. Transparency is the means to ensure trust. Reliable, relevant and timely information has to be provided on both sides to people for policy development, but also to government people to make the right decisions. And we look around at current political streams. There are so many cases where transparency is the challenge to be addressed, where transparency or the lack of transparency hampers actual decisions. Just giving an example from Germany, there is this Stuttgart 21 project where in the Stuttgart city a big new train station should be built, and decisions were made nearly 10 years ago for this investment. And it's nearly 1 year ago, approximately, I think it started in October, people have been informed that this reconstruction will start, and the bulldozer should come to bring down some walls. And then people started to reflect, wow, what the hell are they doing there? And they went on the street and protest, and they stopped this project. It's a huge investment from the German trains, the state of Baden-Württemberg and the city of Stuttgart. And for a year now, everything has stopped because people did not understand what was going on. They didn't understand what the budget plans were there, and they were not involved directly in decision making. But people do not want just to trust anymore in government. They want to have a say. They want to understand. They want to have trust and transparency in such decision makings. This is just a wonderful example from Germany now. But there are so many examples in the last few years emerging that evidence that people want to be involved when it comes to decisions that have an impact on their social life, well-being, economic environment, and so on. So also in sustainable development, it is so important to involve the grassroots people, to involve those to which an objective should be reached, those where impact should be achieved, value should be created. And if we go further, the OECD has published a study in 2009 focused on citizens, which stresses once again the involvement, the engagement of people in better policy making. And they say that open and inclusive policy making offers one way of improving policy performance and meeting citizens' rising expectations. Public engagement in the design and delivery of public policy and services can help governments better understand people's needs, leverage a wider pool of information and resources, improve compliance, constrain costs, and reduce the risks of conflict and delays downstream. So open policy development is key in nowadays strategic long-term planning, policy development. And that means that by open policy development, we can reach transparency, accountability, public participation, and we can build capacity at the grassroots. And this is the objectives that were mentioned just before with the good governance principles. And it offers also a way for governments to improve the policy performance through working with the citizens and the civil society organizations, businesses and other stakeholders to deliver concrete improvements in policy outcomes and quality of public services. Now, we have talked a lot about policy now. We have heard before some examples of strategic development. But what really do we understand by a policy? Can we get some examples from your side about policies? I think there were some examples before already, but let's dig into it once again. Some examples of public policy. Which ones do you have in your environment? Have you been involved in developing such a policy? What makes up a policy? Any ideas? When we talk about the policy, what is meant with it? Yes, please.
I guess there are many interpretations about what policy stands for the domain
Yeah.
that policy will be applied for. But I guess from my background, we're an e-government, and we are developing policies for many tracks. We have a couple of policies. For IT policies, we have security policies, we have enterprise architecture policies, we have internet usage policy, and I guess there are many policies, but we intend to build a policy framework to maintain the discipline for organization and people to adhere with. This is the objective. But I give us many examples of policies. I mean, one of the major examples of policies we have what's called enterprise architecture policies, how government entities should be collaborate together in order to follow a disciplined way to adopt e-government initiatives.
Yeah, you're referring to one particular understanding of policy. And when we talk about public governance, we broaden the understanding, like, for example, to develop and set up visions for where we want to reach at, let's say in 5 years, for example, and how we can achieve that. So a policy, for example, for introducing renewable energy in an environment. That was one of the aspects that was also mentioned before. In the project that I will be introducing, we have a case where it's from Slovakia, the Košice region, which is close to the border to Ukraine. It is dependent very much on gas import from Ukraine, and the policy that they want to develop is, well, how can we get out of this dependency by not only reducing this dependency, but also increasing the production of renewable energy, green energy, because that's also in line with wider policies. But also, how can we educate people that they don't waste the energy consumption, so that they really use energy in an effective way and efficient way. It's just a different case of a policy, public policy. And another area of public policy would be structural funds from the European Union. Structural funds investments are to support regions which need further investment in structural development, to help them and develop their infrastructure, economic growth, and things like that. And then the question is, locally, well, where to best spend the money? It's not only that, well, you have the money, there must be reasons, and there must be well thought through plans for investments so that impact is in the end achieved. There must always be a long-term goal for policy development. And this is just another case where the project will investigate the policy development. What we have to recognize here in this context is that public engagement is a sine qua non in our nowadays environment for effective public governance. And there are two stakes that we have to consider here. The one is the government stake. Governments cannot alone deal with complex global and domestic challenges, such as climate change or the energy production, the energy consumption, like the Košice case. It's also one of the cases where the citizens need to be informed and trained, capacity building on how to best spend in most effective way, spend energy, heating, in order to reduce their costs, but also in order to spend the energy in a green style, so to become more environmental oriented, thinking about what impact different energy producing systems have, and if you waste too much energy, what impact that has in long run on the climate, and the whole climate change is a wider impact that we have to see in this respect. Governments also have to face hard trade-offs, such as responding to rising demands for better quality of public services despite tight budgets. And they need to work with the citizens and other stakeholders to find solutions. And the other stake is the citizen stake. As I said before, they are more educated, well-informed, and less differential now in order to judge their governments on democratic performance and policy performance. Democratic performance so that they are being involved in the policy decision-making and that these decisions are transparent. And policy performance, that the policies settled are really reached, that there is an impact reached. And people want to know about this. They want to be involved in this more and more. And technology provides, information society is a means that can provide it. Now, before going into further details and introducing the project, I want to discuss a little bit with you, what do you see of the main challenges currently in collaborative policy development? Yes, please. Citizens do not really want to cooperate and they don't want to participate. Why do you think this is a challenge? And why do you think it is so?
Well, I think I have many ideas on why that is so. I think the challenge is that if government is trying to get, for instance, feedback on a policy proposal, and the feedback remains unanswered by citizens, or you only hear from one segment of the citizenship, then you're not really getting a full area or full representation of what the public is thinking. So then you have a problem of, are you only hearing from the people from the the extremes of the sides? You're not really hearing from the center, and I think the reason is citizens often don't want to be bothered. I mean, I think
okay, certainly this is a very valid observation, but I would actually hold something against it. And if we consider some of the evolutions in the recent past over the last year, we see that actually citizens do want to get involved. Not everybody, certainly, and certainly there are also different means of engaging people. If it is there are studies actually which are evidence. If it is a policy that is that far away, I fully agree with you. But if it's something which I'm locally concerned with, I want to have a say.
I totally agree with it, because when I'm looking at different experiments in the United States, if you see at the federal government level, which eventually trickles down to the citizen, you see fairly low engagement levels. But if it's a building of a garbage dump behind my house, well, I'm gonna participate. So you definitely see the difference.
And this is one of the ways where we have to go. We cannot just generalize and say, well, the e-participation projects have evidence citizens don't want to engage. We have to segregate them and say, well, this is a policy that concerns certain stakeholders, certain types of citizens in the region. They may be geographically grouped, they may be topic-wisely grouped, and so on. So, and then different ways of conceptualizing the projects have to be done. There is another point in the back.
Thank you. I would mention three things, and I guess the first is that quite often in the heads of citizens and in the heads of people, the terms policymaking and politics get confused, and often people think, I don't want to be associated to any political party, and then they think that automatically applies also to be a member or be a part in public policy making. So I think that's an area where a lot of work can be done, especially by civil society organizations, explaining the difference between politics and policy making. But then there are two other issues that I wouldn't say that they are risky challenges, but I think that that's what I see emerging. Is one I would call is a rise of single issues. The non-profit organizations have fought hard in the last 20 years, both international as well as nationally, in putting certain topics in the agenda, in the political agenda. And while doing so, they have negotiated relatively good concepts of, codes of good practice, participatory lawmaking, so on. So they have gained certain ground, and now with the increase of social media, it allows individuals or groups of individuals to have, regular citizens just forming around them and rising for a certain issue without a long agenda, without a long policy-making tradition. And what I see in the non-profit world happening is actually bothers a lot of civil society organizations. They feel that they're losing the ground, not to the government, not to the business, but to their own members and to their own citizens, because they become so institutionalized, a lot of us or a lot of them, and that kind of individual approach to solve an immediate issue in my neighborhood or in my local government is one fantastic opportunity, but not necessarily for civil society organizations. And the third that I see as a challenge is the kind of proof of evidence thing, is that collaborative policy development also means that either both parties or all parties involved, I guess that would be more appropriate to say, need to be not simply professional enough on equal terms, but also need to have access to the same kind of data. And whereas in some countries we have a lot of open data, so either as a non-profit organization or as a government agency, we can operate with the same data. It doesn't apply necessarily in all the other countries, and the proof of evidence is used quite often against non-profits, against collaborative policy development, saying you have no idea what you're talking about. So these are my three comments.
Thank you. I think you're raising also quite important issues, and for the last point, actually, providing access to information is really crucial. And also here we have to separate how much information is to be given to whom, and how you present the information actually. It's not that the citizens will have the time to read all the text they won't have. But there is an issue where we will talk here in the project, where we can use technology to help us sort out, extracting the valuable information, and then help us visualize the relationships, the interdependencies among different information aspects that have an impact to coming up to a certain decision. And to the aspect of civil society organization losing grounds, because people are organizing themselves or chaotically engaging themselves through social media. This is also an aspect where I think we will have to reflect further, which goes very much into transitional development, sustainable development. Because, you do very often, in a way, express a point where you're just now engaged. You do not want to follow strict and rigid policy development procedures. And so governments will have to open up and expand their capacity also to engage in this kind of processes and to see what is out there, hearing the constituency from that way of interaction. This is just another channel, but it's a channel where the voices can really be heard because the people are there. It's not that people will follow up and will just engage when the government will say. They will want to have their own say, and they will use the means available. Now, let's have a look at the Kokomo project. I will try to hurry up a little bit because I think we're a little bit beyond time. We have addressed current challenges in policy making mostly. We have already discussed about the complexity management, and yeah, most of this has been said, so I will not dig into it further. One of the key problems that we faced when we developed this proposal was that we recognize when we talk about policy modeling, and now I'm talking about policy modeling in terms of the policy advisors to governments for policy development, like a renewable energy policy to be developed, information society policy to be developed, sustainable development policy to be developed, and so on. Usually, the policy advisors, they have tools available, and they use tools for predictions, for assessment of alternatives, but these tools are not really accessible to the broad constituency, to different stakeholders. It's something where these policy advisors are experts, and even the politicians usually do not understand the econometric models behind, the economic calculations behind certain simulations, but such tools are being used. And now this is where the Kokomo project comes in. The project as such aims at supporting key stakeholders to participate in such processes of policy formulation. When we talk about key stakeholders, we mean what we said before. It's not the general public as such, but really the groups that are concerned with the topic, like in the Košice case, in terms of renewable energy, it's householders, it's flat owners, it's producers of renewable energy, it's the regional government and the local municipalities, and it's green organizations who want to take care about climate protection and so on. So we talk about particular stakeholders. That's why we don't talk about citizen engagement, but we use the term stakeholder engagement. We integrate methods and tools for scenario-based policy development and formal policy modeling. I will explain this process in a minute. And we integrate different tools and provide an integrated ICT platform for supporting this policy development with different means of open collaboration and stakeholder engagement. Sorry. Now, first contribution from this project is the integrated policy development process, which involves different actors. I have to say, and responding to what we discussed before, different means of institutionalized policy development processes, we here rely on certain institutional processes, because yeah, in the project scope this is not possible to change. However, there will be some reflection in the government cases which are involved here. So we start actually from the government side, which sees the necessity of a new policy, or which has put in place a policy and wants to monitor it now. Or it's a civil society organizations project. They see the need and want to force governments to come up with a certain policy and commonly develop this. Now we need, in order to engage people, we need a starting point. And the starting point is a narrative scenario, an initial scenario, which is fed with background information to evidence the starting point. And this means here in this project, in this initial phase, we have domain experts those who want to trigger this policy and who have expert knowledge in it, and facilitators to come up with the scenario description in order that in the next phase, when we involve the wider stakeholder groups, they have a good understanding of the starting point. Now, in the second phase, this is the place where citizens, the stakeholders, are engaged to develop their own views on the policy to be developed. So they can develop alternative scenarios. The scenarios can also be conflicting. They describe their view on the policy. We call them evidence-based stakeholder-generated scenarios. Evidence-based because also the different stakeholder groups, they may have their own background information and evidence to inform their scenario, to inform their own view. And again, this can be conflicting between different stakeholder groups. As you see, I'm sure you're aware of also in current practice, you may have opposing organizations. They do their own studies, and the studies may have contradicting information, depending on who performed the study. So each of them may have background information affiliated to the individual scenarios. In order to make this vast amount of information, the different viewpoints, understandable, and in order to inform the subsequent formal policy models, we developed conceptual models. Conceptual models are like an ontology diagram, actor network diagrams, role dependency graphs, and so on. They are conceptual representations, models of the information otherwise documented in the scenarios and in the background documents. And this is mostly done by the facilitators and the policy analysts. Next step is then to generate out of the conceptual models and the background information policy model. That is a simulation model in formal code, like in Java code, which describes the actors in agent templates and in characteristics of agents, and the rules in code, in program code. And out of this, you run the simulations. And out of the simulations, so in this formal policy models, programs, you have certain parameters which you can variate. And here in the simulation, then you set at a certain time certain parameters, the values of the parameters. And then you have an outcome of that one simulation instance, and we call this scenario-based scenarios. And the outcome are basically text traces describing step by step what the simulation generated out of this. And this model-based scenarios are then the outcome from the simulation, which are in the next step compared and exposed to the stakeholders, compared to their stakeholder-generated scenarios. So they can then see from the simulation, which elucidates inconsistencies or new findings from the simulation run, with what they have defined in their own scenarios. And they can see whether this corresponds to each other, whether there are conflicts from different parties, and whether they agree to the simulation, because this is fact-based and this is precise. And up there may be variances, there's imprecision, but there is exploration up there. And new facts, new aspects can be brought into the scenarios from the different viewpoints of the stakeholders, which then feed the policy model in these iterations. And when we come to an agreement here at a point, well, we see that the simulation model and the stakeholder-generated scenario model are consistent. We have reached an understanding and agreement. And this is the basis for actually providing transparency, participation in the policy development. We thereby use, and I think I have this in one of the next slides, ICT tools to enable the stakeholders to participate online. We explore formal simulation to inform about whether the policy case is consistent and what the alternatives, the consequences of the individual alternatives would be and there is to make stakeholders better understand policy decisions. The artifacts along the process phases are, as already indicated before, initial scenarios with background documents. In the second phase, the stakeholder-generated scenarios. We then, in the step 3, extract from all these documents the relevant information to generate an ontology, actor network diagrams, rule dependency graphs, rules, and so on. Of course, not everything will be coming out from the background documents and the scenarios. So some expert knowledge of our policy analysts will also feed into these conceptual models, which are then transformed into simulation models. And these are then generated in model-generated scenarios. Some charts can also be extracted here, showing certain evolutions, and this is fed back into the other concepts. And yeah, the tool that the toolbox that we are aiming at here is then supporting, on the one hand, the participation, the collaborative development with the different means of Web 2.0 technology, the policy modeling tool, the scenario development tool, and the complexity management support to manage the information in there, and of course, different content base that is to be to support the policy development. And yeah, by using this approach, integrating scenario with formal policy model, we help inform the formal policy model design through the stakeholder involvement, as they have the knowledge about the policy case. They understand and they want to express their own views, and this with the stakeholder-generated scenarios, we can express these views. And the models then produce simulations, which are actually formal scenarios, because they are precise based on the formal programming. And the participating stakeholders, they can then evaluate these model-generated scenarios and see some surprises which lead into further investigation. And in this way, we elucidate the whole policy development. We come to common views, and we help people to understand how decisions can be made. And this is likewise not only for the stakeholders, but also for the political decision makers, because then they also can better understand and decide better informed decisions. As I said, we have two different kinds of scenarios, and due to time I will not dig into this more. The two concepts that we are using here are complementary scenarios and policy models. Like chaining, the scenarios are developed with the goal in mind. You have a vision, and you describe the vision in the scenario, so you do kind of a backward chaining. You describe it in your actual context, and the models are built from the behavior and the contextual evidence, and there is using then forward chaining rules. Richness and precision. Richness in the scenarios, and the precision in the rule base and the models to describe the agent and their behavior, and exploitation and exploration scenarios exercises are natural to encourage exploration, like ideas generation, and the models facilitate the exploitation and understanding of prevailing context. Now, as we using scenarios very heavily, and this is a tool which helps actually people better understand policy context and express their own views, I'd like to investigate, as last point here, what scenario development can help. The method for foresight, according to Geschke, defined in '78 for scenario building, is that it is systematic, it's participatory, it's a future intelligent gathering and medium to long-term vision building process aimed at present-day decisions and mobilizing joint actions. So again, referring to policy. But what is really a scenario? I want to explore it with you. Sorry. When you hear, sorry, I've got a cold, so that's the problem that I'm losing my voice now a little bit. When you read scenario, what do you think is meant with a scenario? What would you imagine a scenario to be? Anybody has used scenario technique already for policy development? No? You have heard about it? Any ideas? No? Okay. So I will go ahead. Sorry. When we talk about a scenario, scenarios are used in many different ways. They are usually textual descriptions of a certain environment. They can be used in systems design for describing some use case. So we describe use case scenarios, but they are also heavily used in foresight planning. Rand company already used scenario development in the 80s to predict technology trends. That's quite popular technique. In this environment, for policy development, we explore it similarly, like the Rand Corporation or technology-oriented policy support planning is also using this. Scenarios as texts which covers existing world status or mental models of the stakeholders. You develop then, by the different stakeholders, alternative scenarios which describe the aspects relevant to that specific stakeholders. And so scenarios may also be conflicting between different stakeholders because they may have opposing ideas and imaginations. And scenarios is a tool also to expand. So you don't need to have the whole set of scenarios already at first place, but you start, as I mentioned in the methodology, with an initial scenario, and then you start developing it. And step by step, you get more and more understanding. So you may develop nested scenarios. You may develop alternatives to understand, well, the one extreme or the other extreme, and expose the aspects of these extremes just in natural text. And in this respect, scenarios are very simple tools for giving a voice to the people to express their opinion in a certain policy. This is what we do here. This is just an extract of a scenario from the Košice self-governing region. I don't want you to read the whole text, but it's a story that a citizen explains living in a house in Košice, and the thoughts that this person have. The different colors are highlighting different actors, and this is relevant then for the formal policy models, because this will be the agents to be programmed which have a certain behavior, which set certain actions based on certain rules. So this will be important for the conceptual model and later on for the formal policy model. So we have stakeholders, we have classes of objects, like in this case we have renovation, energy price, energy consumption, things like that, energy audits, the flat, the houses, and things like that. Then we have the actions, like cooperating with, so an association may refuse to cooperate with a service company, and may make arrangements with heat providers on its own, things like that. So there are certain actions set, and this is all just written in one scenario, which informs later on the policy models. And the yellow one are the relationships, like is responsible for something. The association is responsible for dealing with heat and electricity providers. Or a person living in a flat, so living in a relationship. And this way, you create the whole policy context, and this informs the formal policy model then, where you run your simulation. I just show you very simple here, extracting all the text, which then you feed into conceptual model, and finally into the rule engine, where you run the simulation. And this is all helping in the end, supporting transparency, enabling through this scenario generation the stakeholders to participate in the policy formulation. And there is no good or bad scenario. The alternatives can be picked up. They are feeding the policy model, and so all aspects can be considered through the multi-agent simulation. Now, I think I will stop at this point. This is just a tool that we are developing in this project, where you have the scenario here, you highlight the text. This is just like this is a relationship. It's from a different policy case, which then is the conceptual model, and this is the ontology as such. And this tool helps them to develop the formal policy model. I want to skip this because maybe it's becoming too complex. So there is a model behind the policy development and a meta model behind. And this should help then to transform the narrative text into, in the end, policy statements which are actually in the code. And through such a transformation then, and the conceptual model that I showed, people can understand how policies are being developed. Yeah, and this is where I would like to stop here, actually. And would like to ask you some questions. Do you see this as an example to support sustainable development? Just before we conclude for lunch. We are using this policy approach in 3 cases in Europe. One is this renewable energy case in Košice. Another one is in London housing, where the Greater London Authority is actually the authority that decides where funding goes for constructing housing, and then the boroughs are responsible to construct the houses and to provide enough living, social living houses, market houses, and so on. Well, there is of course politics behind, so people do not want to live in a certain borough but in another one, and also at the political level there is a conflict of interest, because some boroughs get more money, others less, and they would need, so we use this method also for elucidating the different positions and involving also citizens as stakeholders for housing policy. Yeah, and we are in halfway of the project, so we are starting the trials soon. What we have done is conceptualizing the method. What I think is also quite important in this respect is that it's not the technology as such. The technology is just a means to support citizen engagement in the policy development, and to provide a structured way of consultation, which is quite important. Also to provide a means using technology for the knowledge elucidation and the conceptual visualization of well, what is going on in order to inform the people.
Your experience, the citizen engagement, using this technology, these tools, who conduced it?
Yeah, as I said, okay, it doesn't matter, I don't. we have at the front end actually a Web2 e-participation platform. So the citizen can use the tool for the scenario development, and they can, if they are interested in, see the conceptual models. They don't have to do anything with the simulation model because this is some expert knowledge and expert capacity needed. But then they see again the simulation output, and this is the part where the citizen and the ordinary stakeholder comes in. And then you have some part, of course, where you need always some expert knowledge for that. Yeah. We did not apply this so far into educational policies, no. But this could be an interesting case, yeah. And actually what I wanted also to mention, we have this new policy project which will seek for such examples. This is an international coordination activity. It's funded by the European Union, but it's spanning across the whole globe. So for example, UNU is also involved in this project. We have partners from USA, Canada, one from Brazil, and also Australia and New Zealand, where we try to collect cases of policy development from research and from practice to investigate them, compare them, and create a knowledge base. And such examples then would be quite interesting to see in the educational domain, which policy development approaches and cases have been performed and so on, and what can be learned from this.
Just to add a comment on this.
Yeah.
When it comes to higher education policy in a state like India, the utility of the education that is provided has to be tested in the public domain. Otherwise, the stakeholders and even the beneficiaries like students later on become unemployable for the local needs.
Yeah.
Utility is affected.
Yeah. It's certainly a very important aspect to be taken into consideration, yeah. So, there's another question?
Are you also using some kind of standard notations like UML to build the scenarios where you show the actors?
Not in the scenario, no. We are using, the ontology, where of course you have the US UML class diagram for the conceptual model of the domain model for the policy. But this is in the CCD. It's not the part which interfaces the stakeholder. So it's used as a transformation mean between narrative text towards formal policy models. Yeah. Yeah.
To what extent the cultural differences are an issue or challenge in participatory policy making? I mean, in Hofstede's term, there is observed, documented difference in power distance in different societies. So, do you think this model is applicable in different cultural contexts?
This is something, we cannot yet tell because we have currently these 3 cases in Europe. But with these new initiatives, we hope to be able to assess the applicability also in other domains. And this will be certainly a question to Tomasz, whether this can be also transformed. Actually, there is an interest from you and your colleagues to see whether this could be applied also to other areas, especially in sustainable development. And then the question of different cultures will emerge, certainly. Okay, I think it's time for lunch. Thank you very much for your attention and your contributions, and enjoy lunch.